Hey folks, Andrew Mark Rowe here. Welcome to my podcast, Sophia. Sophia is Greek for wisdom. If you pay close enough attention, it's pretty clear that everybody's wise in our own ways. Although wisdom is pretty hard to transmit, given that it's the product of experience, it's nonetheless important, not to mention a lot of fun, to try. This podcast is focused on conversations with people about our stories of development, the lessons that we've learned, and the different ways we navigate this wild ride of life. Also featuring the odd solo philosophical deep dive. I hope that you enjoy. Hey folks, Andrew Mark Rowe here. Welcome to my new podcast called Sophia. The word Sophia is Greek for wisdom, and bear with me here if you're watching the video because I'm reading off a script. It has a bit of a long history with philosophy, most commonly associated with Gnostic Christianity, but that's not what I want to talk about. Wisdom can be knowledge born of experience. For me, the word represents a few different things, but mostly a state of being, getting okay with the world and living with that okayness. That's Sophia to me. It's not about knowing everything. It's about knowing how little you know. It's about getting into the mystery of life. I mean, really getting into it and just letting it lead you on a journey. I mean, once you have that, what else do you need? But that's just me. One of the things that has piqued my interest over these past couple of years are the stories of other people. The most fascinating thing to me is that everyone has a different perspective on life, no one better than the other. The commonality that holds them all together is this: wisdom. If you are on this rock for long enough, you develop your own way of being. From the raw ore of your own experience, you might mine a moral code of conduct, a way of approaching other people, a way of approaching work, your kids, your life generally, why you do the job that you do, etc., etc. These things don't generally spring up from a vacuum. You might learn the lessons yourself, or you might follow the teachings of some other wise being. But chances are there is something beneath it all. That is what I'm interested in, and what I'm looking to speak with other people about. Here's the thing. I just want to talk to regular, everyday people about their lives. Everyone from my friends to my parents, acquaintances to and strangers. I'd like to hear from you. It's totally okay if you say no. I would love to hear about your life lessons, the catalysts for change and transformation, the reasons that you see the world the way that you do. I want to know how you've become wise. And if you don't feel that that fits your bill, I want to know about you regardless. There's another word from another language I want to chat about. This one is satsang. It's Sanskrit, and according to Jiddu Krishnamurti, a sage from the last century, it means association with good people. He said that if you're a good person, you're wise, and that wisdom rubs off on people. I think that what Krishnamurti was getting at was the universality of wisdom. To be wise, you don't have to be anyone special, quote unquote. I certainly don't feel it's my place to judge anyone as good or bad, as long as you've got a heartbeat. And even if you don't, for all the zombies out there, you're okay by me. I just want to associate with you, share some time with you, and ask you questions about your own experience of wisdom. This is the heart of the podcast. Considering much of my own personal development came about through exposing myself to all sorts of different viewpoints, I want to provide a platform for more people to do the same. Given that this is the first episode and I want people to know what to expect, I'm going to go first. So I'm going to read myself the questions that I've got for other people. I have not practiced this before I've done this, so this is completely off the cuff. These might shift and change as I try this out with more people. Who are you? So my name is Andrew Mark Rowe. I'm what am I? What do I say first? I'm a man from St. John's, Newfoundland. I have a daughter named Iris. I work as a lawyer for my day job. I also write and do this kind of thing. I'm in my mid-30s. my next question is, where do I live? Like I said, I live in St. John's, Newfoundland, which is on an island. It's in Canada. It's on an island off in the Atlantic Ocean. And St. John's is actually right as far east as you can go. And where did I grow up? So I grew up mostly in St. John's, but when I was a kid, so my mother's actually not from Newfoundland, my father is, but my mother's from, she was born in Malone, New York, but grew up in Rosemère, which is a little community outside of Montreal. So her family's was all on the mainland growing up, and my grandparents had a cottage in Carleton Place, which is just outside of Ottawa, a beautiful country. And every summer for several years when I was a kid, Mom would load all of us kids, I have 3 siblings, load us all up in the van and get on the ferry. We'd drive all the way to Ottawa, or to Carleton Place, and it was about a 2.5 day long adventure. I don't know how my mother did it with 4 kids who were about 8 years in the difference, but she did it. She did it every year for, geez, I think the last time we went was like my grandparents sold the place, and it was sometime around when I was 12 or 13. So yeah, after that I was only here in Newfoundland, but I did that time at Carleton Place definitely had a huge impact on me. It was like a paradise, essentially. It was right on the water of a river. My grandfather had a boat. There was a wharf. We used to swim and play all day. My cousins that were living there, I used to spend a lot of time with them. And we would also go to my aunts who lived in St. Thomas, which is much farther south in Ontario. And yeah, I spent some time with them. I got to know my mom's family really well, and I don't think I would have if that wasn't the case. What do I do for a living? Like I said, I'm a lawyer. I work I work as a lawyer. I got into that I think I took a year break after or 2-year break after my undergrad. I didn't know what I wanted to do for the longest time. And after my undergrad, I went to teach English in Korea, and because I did a German and English graduate arts degree, there was absolutely nothing for me to do around here that would have used that degree. So I went and hopped on a plane to Korea. As long as you had a bachelor's degree, they were willing to take you on as a English as a second language teacher in South Korea. I lasted about 3 months doing that. It was not for me, to say the least. So after 3 months, I was back, and I wanted to know. Well, I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I went back to work at this homebrew beer shop that I worked at during my undergrad, which was a fantastic experience, but I was doing minimum part-time, minimum wage. I had stuff to, it wasn't enough for me to live on, so I went to, my brother had just finished he was finishing up law school, and my dad's a lawyer, and so I went and wrote the LSAT, got into law school, and went to New Brunswick to do law school. And then after I finished there, I started with a big firm for a while. I was working with a big firm for a while, and then I got to my current job, which is with an insurance company. Did I change careers? So where did that start? I just kind of got into that. Did I change careers at all? No, I've been a lawyer pretty much. If you want to talk about a career, I've been a lawyer since I kind of settled down. I did start writing pretty much. So I started writing, I would say, I got serious about writing my first year of working as a lawyer. I had I'll get into this in a bit, but I had a very, it was a strange experience that first year. It was very difficult for me, and I had always known that I wanted to write. Some part of me always knew, but it just everything kind of came to a head, and I decided that it was going to be either I started writing or I would lose my mind. And I mean that's a bit melodramatic. I don't think it was that crazy, but I just had this. There was something in me that had to get out, and I didn't even know at the beginning what it was. It was just, I was just like, I had to write, and so I did, and I wrote a bunch of stuff that wasn't. There was a lot of H.P. Lovecraft-esque short stories, which was kind of like horror short stories. There was one or two that I thought were half decent, but most of them were just fluff, and they didn't really go anywhere. And the thing is that I think that whole experience was more of a test of faith than anything. That if I could just push through and keep going, eventually I would get somewhere with it, which was the case. I mean, this is what every single writer that I'd read, like I read Stephen King's On Writing, I read The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, and all those people are basically saying like the most important thing to do is to just get your butt in the chair and write. And hey, they were right. It was a lot of learning self-discipline and all sorts of good stuff like that. So I'm still a lawyer. I'm writing, and I'm being a father. I mean, that's pretty much what my life consists of these days. Every couple of weeks I'll hang out with my buddies and play Dungeons and Dragons. Other than that, I'm pretty much a low-key person. I spend a lot of my time doing just that. There's stuff like this, writing. And so, yeah, I didn't change careers. I'm still a lawyer. And I'm juggling writing with it too. And I have never been happier. Do I have any hobbies that give me fulfillment? Well, this is it. This and writing. Talking to people about my experiences. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Did you have teachers or mentors in your early life? I'd say my early life, my biggest mentor. That's a hard question. I said in this question doesn't have to be family members, but I think that my grandfather played a big role in my early life. I actually dedicated one of my books, The Amaral Company. It's a novella that was set in the world of my first fantasy cycle called the Clovier Cycle, which has got the yoga trilogy. Anyways, that book, The Amaral Company, I dedicated it to him. And it's funny, one of the things that I remember the most clearly about my relationship with him was a conversation that we had. I think we were here in St. John's. This was one year he and my grandmother came in from the mainland, and they were driving an RV, and they were had it parked out in front of my parents' house, and I think we were having a conversation. It was nighttime at my parents' driveway, and basically I was at the stage. My parents never really took me to church, or we weren't a religious family in any way, shape, or form. And I said to him, "Do you believe in God?" And I kind of knew that he did. I mean, he was French Catholic from Quebec. I mean, this was his lineage, I suppose. And he told me, I believe in a force, and I it was weird because, I mean, everything I'd heard from people when I did rarely ever go to church was, this idea of God personified as some sort of other thing. This dude who judges and smites and does all that kind of stuff. And it just kind of took me back a little bit, and I still was thinking, oh, this is, that's not real, or something arrogant. And it was a little 12-year-old kid. Just, anyways, but that stuck with me. It stuck with me throughout all the years. And I mean, there were other fun memories that I have with my grandfather, but that one I never really realized how much impact that had on me till very recently. And I'm 34 now, so it's been a long time. How about late in my life? How many mentors? Well, this is a difficult. There's been a lot of different people that I have, I would consider mentors for my later life. As to who they are, I mean, it's very difficult to pin all of them down, because I'm thinking more about people that I've read, different philosophers, that kind of things. There's also my experience with ayahuasca, which I only recently started talking publicly about, which I will get into in a little bit, but that definitely had a very mentor-like effect on me. And, okay, who were they? Don't need to give any identifying information. What was your relationship to them? Well, most of the philosophers that I have encountered have been either through books or podcasts. I went through different phases with a bunch of different people. I listened to a lot of Joe Rogan, Aubrey Marcus. I listened to, who else? The thing about Rogan is that he had so many different guests that it kind of brought in, it opened me up to a whole bunch of different people. That was from the podcast side. Ram Dass has had a pretty big effect on me. Alan Watts. If I had to say the philosopher with whom I resonated the most, it'd probably be Alan Watts, who was he was an English. He was an English student of theology, and he went to the East and brought back a bunch of different, brought back a bunch of Buddhist and Hindu ideas and packaged them up for the West. And he very much was about the idea that there's no person greater than another when it comes to anything spiritual, and whether or not you're aware of your identity as something greater than what you think you are, it doesn't matter. It was kind of this idea that there was no special club for people who were more awakened or enlightened or anything like that, and that has had a huge effect on me, in terms of what I want to bring to the world and what I've encountered myself, and just in my own meditations on life and all of my own experience. And that's something that definitely paints the way I am trying to speak to the world and bring my art to the world. What about other kinds of relationships? Any other significant relationships that changed how you look at the world? Again, no identifying information needed. Yeah, I'm going to not identify some people, talk about this, but there have been relationships that I've had within my life that have not been, let's say, overwhelmingly positive. From a surface perspective, I've had relationships with people throughout my entire life that have had, a mix of good and bad. And one of the things that also another person that really affected me was Carl Jung, and he talks a lot about the shadow and the how basically everyone kind of comes into this world and takes on a bunch of we get damaged in some way or traumatized in some way as we're children, and this creates a shadow within us, within our unconscious, that we don't like to look at. And when we do look at it, if we have the courage to look at it, that's how we get better, essentially. And that's what he thought the role of the psychologist would be, or psychotherapist, to go through this process with people. And so, the thing is that everyone does pick up some stuff when they're kids, and you can look at it as a bad thing or a good thing, depending on how far along you are with it. I think I'm very grateful for all the relationships I had in my life. I wouldn't be the person I am today, and I'm very happy with who I am today. And I don't think I could have said that 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I certainly don't think I could have said that 7 years ago. But there have been relationships that they were, let's say, scarring, or I would say that a lot of people would write some people off in their lives because they weren't that great for them. But let's just say, I have had those kinds of relationships. With as much or as little detail as you like, tell me about your spiritual background, if you have one. Well, again, my parents were pretty atheistic. We were baptized at the United Church, I believe, which is my father's side of the family, which I know is different. But I'm not even going to get into that kind of worms. But I know I was baptized United. We never went to church. Neither of my parents were very religious, and none of us really had any interest in it when we were younger. I had a very negative reaction to religion when I was younger. I thought it was the stupidest thing. I'm being perfectly honest. I really had no time for it, and I had very little respect for people who did. And I kind of see why that was now, because now I've kind of come full circle on the whole thing, and this is kind of like a common thing that happened for people, is that the more you rail against it, the more you're likely to come across it later in life. At least that's the way it seems to me. I remember reading that The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, and just being completely yes, this is great type of thing. This was in my early 20s. I must have been such an insufferable dude at that point. I know I was, but that was my spiritual background, and I had some experiences in my 20s that kind of made me question that. And it all culminated with a trip to Peru in 2014, December of 2014. I had hit my own version of rock bottom. I've kind of spoken about this a fair bit in some of my essays, but basically I was, if I'm looking at it now from the lens of, let's say, a bit of wisdom, funnily enough, I had dug myself into a pretty deep hole of isolation, and I was depressed. I was drinking a lot. I really was. I didn't see any way forward in my life. I was in a very bad place, mental health wise, extremely bad. And I was listening to one of these podcasts. It was Joe Rogan talking with Amber Lyon, who was a CNN, former CNN correspondent. There was 2 podcasts that he did over the course of a year, leading up to me actually going to Peru. And the first was Amber Lyon came back from Bahrain, I believe, and she was a CNN correspondent, and she was a war correspondent, so she was seeing a lot of really messed up stuff and interviewing a lot of people who had seen a lot of messed up stuff. And she came back, and basically she had to do stuff like smuggle out a memory card full of video of her interviews with these people, and like videos of the ravages of war in that country, or whatever was going on. The government was suppressing its people, and she came back, and she went to CNN and was like prepared this documentary, did a bunch of work on it, and then CNN basically buried it. I think they played it once at midnight on a Saturday instead of playing it several times over the course of a month, or whatever kind of blast of information they were going to do for it. And she came to the conclusion that it was because there was some sort of interference from government, essentially the American government. And so she came on Rogan's podcast and was talking about this, and at the end of the discussion, Rogan brought up mushrooms first, psilocybin mushrooms, and then he brought up ayahuasca and spoke to her about it. And she had never had anything more serious than a joint in her life, and she was open to it, but she was very, I don't know if skeptical was the word, but she was kind of she just didn't know what to think of it. And then I think it was 9 months went by, and then she was back on the podcast, and I remember like saying, "Oh, this is interesting," so I popped it on, and she was talking about having gone down to Peru and taken ayahuasca in a ceremonial setting with the shaman, the whole thing, which is kind of what Rogan had spoke to her about. And essentially what happened with her is that she was going to create her own new video, like a documentary series about the news stories that the government or that the big news companies wouldn't cover. So like the Bahrain story. And she was going along her life, and then she had a complete mental breakdown. And she just booked a ticket to Peru, jumped on the flight. It was very fascinating story. If you ever get a chance to listen to it, it was one of Joe Rogan, Amber Lyon. Anyways, she went down to Peru, and she had these series of epiphanies about her mental health, and just from drinking this stuff in a ceremonial setting. And it was very powerful and moving to me, because I just heard, this was 9 months in the difference, and I was going through my very difficult times myself, and I wasn't finding that there was anything that was working for me. And so I just had made the decision that I was going to do it. I was going to go down to Peru, and it was extremely scary, by all accounts, it was a crazy fucking plan. I remember Dad actually said to me when I was putting together my stuff to go, and I told him that I was going to go to Peru, and it was just I told Mom and Dad that, and I was living in their basement at the time because I just hadn't gotten my shit together. I've been working as a lawyer for a couple of years, and I'd gone through some relationship stuff, but regardless, I was living in their basement. And I remember Dad saying to me is that I don't know what to do aside from physically restraining you. And yeah, I mean, I was terrified of stuff like my parents committing me to a mental asylum, that kind of insanity. But it was a very scary experience. And I went to Peru, and I had a life-changing experience. Like it totally. I have said and continue to say to this day, the best thing I ever did was go down to Peru and drink ayahuasca. It shifted the way I look at the world entirely, and it was the weirdest thing about it is because, I mean, the stuff in Canada is illegal. Some of the constituents are on the controlled drugs and substances like, but the messages that I was getting, or like the teachings, because they call it a plant teacher, that's the ayahuasca, and it's basically like sitting down with a therapist who looks at your mind and tells you exactly where you're going wrong in life, and teaches you how to fix it, but it's all told through visionary metaphor. That's probably the best way I can describe it. At least those have been my experiences with it. And everything that happened to me was what I would consider to be a socially positive change in me. I came back and I started working much harder at work. I started being kinder to the people around me. I started doing things for other people without any thought for myself. I started, it was all these things that I got out of it. It was, like, I stopped drinking for the longest time. Like, these are things that I think people would consider to be a socially positive thing. And it just kind of it blew my mind that this was, something that we had not only not looked at. Like, it all kind of got swept up in the I think in the 70s, when everything was made illegal, all the psychedelics were made illegal. They just swept up a bunch of stuff that had never even been looked at. But anyways, not getting into the political side of things, but the whole, like, this is something that turned me from a selfish, self-centered, not the best member of society. Not that I was, I wouldn't say I was, doing anything wrong, but I just was not contributing. And now I went back to Peru again and participated in more ceremonies, and the change that has occurred in my life has been entirely, without a doubt, a wonderful thing. And part of that change is that there was a spiritual element to it. I mean, I had an experience of God or oneness, or however you want to describe it. I mean, this is intrinsic to the experience, I think. Excuse me. But it wasn't coming at me from the pages of a book or from somebody telling me how it was. It was coming at me from an internal mechanism. And so it was a direct experience of the mystical. And that was part of the reason why I stopped being such a shitheel. I mean, this is it. It's all interrelated. There's no separating those things out, I think. And my own conception of God is my own conception of God. I think it was Joseph Campbell who said that it's a species of impudence to think that the way that you know God is the way that God is. But my experience with spirituality is that it has transformed me into a very positive, upbeat, high-functioning member of society who just wants everyone to feel as happy as he does. I mean, this is why I'm doing everything that I do. I mean, the thing is that it's not a panacea. This stuff isn't a panacea. It was essentially, here is what I have to do to, like, it was basically like being in school. It was like, here's what I have to do when I go home to make my life better. And it wasn't easy. It was breaking habits. I mean, breaking habits is one of the hardest things to do, but if you're committed and motivated and you have a game plan, which is what I got, you can do that. And so, yeah, that was how I came to spirituality. And now I would say that I believe in God. But my belief in God isn't I'm going to smite you or it's not the literal interpretation of the Bible, which is what I thought that it was growing up. That was what God was to me, and that was all foolishness when I didn't understand it whatsoever. So, yeah, now I have a spiritual background. Okay, what got me started asking the big questions? I think that is probably been covered already. Have I had any experiences that I would deem transformative, and how did they come about? Again, these are, I've already answered these questions. My life philosophy. How would I describe my life philosophy? Well, I just have one thing that I do now, and this is part of what I got out of the ayahuasca experience, was learning how to follow my heart. And I mean, that is not just, that doesn't just mean do whatever the hell you want all the time. There's a difference between acting on instinct and following your heart. I think following your heart is you have to learn what it sounds like first, and the only way you're going to learn what it sounds like is if you start doing kind things for people and acting out of a place of selfless love. That is what it's like, a snowball effect, and that's been my experience of it. The more you act that way, the louder the sound gets, the easier it is to follow the path. That's the entirety of the philosophy. Like, that's all I do now. There's nothing, no other consideration for me. And since that has been the case, my life has just been getting better and better and better. And so, but it all boils down to one thing: just being love, whatever love looks like at every given moment. And it's a wonderful thing for me. I mean, for me, for the people around me, I think. I mean, I try, I don't know, I try to be as kind a person as I can be, and how people take that is totally their half of the relationship. But I think that certainly my family life has changed quite a bit since then, since I've started doing this. How do I approach relationships? Again, I just follow my heart. There's nothing fancy about it. When I was a kid, I used to, Jesus, this reminds me of something. So when I was a kid, I was very, well, first I was overweight when I was a teenager. And I used to think that made me horrifically unattractive, and I had no confidence in myself. When I got into my early 20s, I'd lost a bunch of weight. I went to, so I basically lost a bunch of weight, but then I was interested in women. I didn't know how to approach them. And so I read this book, The Game by Neil Strauss, which was a pickup artist's guide, essentially. It was how to manipulate people. It was it was a bad part of my life, or it was a bad part of my life. I mean, to some degree it did help me to be a little bit more confident, and so I can't really throw the entire baby out with the bathwater, but it was very much treating people as objects was part of the whole thing, and treating relationships as, how can they serve me? How can they serve me? Whereas now my view on relationships is, how can I serve the relationship? How can I serve other people? That's where it's come. That's where it's changed now, and the other part of it doesn't matter to me anymore. If I, I just got out of a romantic relationship a few months ago, and it was hard, and it was sad, and it was all those things, but I don't I didn't download Tinder as soon as the thing was over, and I don't intend on doing anything but what never say never, but that's kind of, if I meet somebody or something happens like that, and I'll be open to it, but it's not something that I'm looking for, I suppose. How do I approach my job? Well, my job, when I am at my job, I'm working. I do enjoy my job. I do enjoy being a lawyer. I didn't at first. I'll be honest, I didn't at first. But part of what came to me through the ayahuasca experience was the idea that anything that you do can be an act of service for other people. And I really started to live that philosophy. And I mean, is there days when it's harder than others? Of course. I mean, that's just the way it goes. But there's definitely that element of being of service to people that has made me fall in love with it. I also really enjoy going into a courtroom and arguing a case. It's a natural high that's pretty incomparable. Leisure time. What do I do in my leisure time? Well, I mostly just do my writing and that kind of thing. I do play video games from time to time. I do watch movies and shows from time to time. I don't, I know that all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, but I definitely spend most of my time working on my own little projects like this. I do play Dungeons and Dragons with my buddies, and I do go out every once in a while, but definitely more focused on this than spending all my time doing leisurely activities. Where is the most exciting place I've traveled? Well, I'd have to say Peru, for obvious reasons. If I had to name one bit of wisdom that has helped me the most, what would it be, and where did it come from? Well, it would have to be that, following your heart. Following your heart no matter what. And this is one of the things where I think people get tripped up a little bit, because there's always a little bit of holding back. There's this idea that if we follow our heart too much, we're going to ruin our lives, essentially. And again, I think this is getting back to, are you actually listening to your heart, or are you acting on instinct or conditioned behaviors like that? There's addictions or conditioned behaviors. Like if you're feeding an addiction, you are not following your heart. So if you can learn how to listen to your heart and follow it no matter what, and this is where courage comes into play, because one of my debut novel, The Yoga of Strength, is about the power of courage, and basically doing what you know is right in spite of the fact that you are fearful of what might occur. I mean, like this, to me, going down to Peru that first time, that was like one of my first instances of me saying, no, I'm going to do what I know is right. And even the stuff with the game and like approaching women and all that stuff when I was younger, I mean, that was part of it. That was doing what my heart was telling me to do in spite of the fear. And that is it, I think, in spite of the fear. The fear is always going to be there. The fear, the fear is, you come to understand what it is. Fearlessness is about recognition. It's about recognizing the fear for what it is and just saying, I'm not playing that game. I've played that game for a huge amount of my life, and I'm not playing it anymore. And if you go down that path, things start to get a little bit wonky. They start to get a little bit screwy, and you start to, I mean, that was my experience of it. And there's life starts to become very strange and very surprising and very wonderful all at the same time, as long as you follow your heart. Joseph Campbell's said follow your bliss, which, having read and listened to a lot of his stuff, I know he's talking about the same thing. Yeah, it's that is it. Are there any other teachers or philosophers or religious figures I want to talk about? I'm interested in their significance. That's a very good question. Like I said, Alan Watts is probably the biggest. See, it's difficult because, I kind of like pick and choose from different stuff that I encounter that I find extremely valuable. Joseph Campbell, he had a huge impact on me. He was the guy who wrote The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and he spoke about the monomyth. He was a comparative mythologist, and he compared all these myths from all these different cultures and came up with this story, The Hero's Journey, which is basically a template or a framework that can be applied to pretty much any story from any culture. And the significance of that is, what does it say about the human spirit if this is something that we resonate with? And I mean, he was talking about enlightenment. That's what the apotheosis of the hero's journey is. And when I was having my experience, because I had an experience of enlightenment in November of 2017. It was the evening after I was working at a soup kitchen, and I was off on paternity leave for my daughter who was born, and I had no idea it was coming. And I think that's the way these kinds of things happen. But what did kind of start to twig me to the fact that it was happening was I started to recognize the metaphorical significance of the hero's journey within my own life. And when I did that, I kind of realized that, okay, I know what this is. I know that I can put everything on the line, which is what the hero has to do. I mean, in all the stories, it all seems lost right before the end. The hero makes a huge sacrifice, and sacrifices everything that they think that they are. And that was it for me. So Joseph Campbell, he definitely did it for me, in terms of helping me with a very seriously mind-bendingly crazy part of my life. But I think that's about it. I think we can wrap that up there. But yeah, so that's it for Sophia, my first episode of Sophia. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you did, I would ask that you rate it on iTunes and give it a review, and share it around with anyone you think might be interested in. And if you want to speak with me, or if you're interested in coming on the podcast or having a chat, or you know somebody who might be interested in coming on, Andrew at AndrewMarkRowe, MarcRowe.com. That's Andrew at AndrewMarkRowe, Andrew MarcRowe.com. Thanks, folks. Have a great day.